If you haven't already seen it, this video is a follow-up to The Decline of Dynasty Warriors, a long video where I more comprehensively cover the Dynasty Warriors and other Musou series. Here I only have a couple things to talk about, things that didn't make it into the main video that I want to cover right now. There was just a few things that I neglected to mention in the main video that I kinda regret not bringing up, and that's what I want to talk about here today, so let's get right into it. To start with, the music. Dynasty Warriors' kick-ass blaring heavy metal soundtrack perfectly complements the over-the-top action and power fantasy of defeating dozens of enemy soldiers, dominating the battlefield. It was also my first introduction to the sound of traditional Chinese instruments. Unlike other areas of the game, such as combat and enemy AI and level design, the music of Dynasty Warriors has always stayed solid. It's never really declined. Not that much, anyway. So why am I making this video then? Well, the music of the new Dynasty Warriors games is a bit of a mixed bag, and overall I just don't like it nearly as much as I like the soundtracks to, say, Dynasty Warriors 4 or 5. To start with, reuse of content. Now, reusing ideas, content, or even straight up assets has honestly always been part of the series' DNA right from the beginning. But that didn't used to be a huge part of the game's soundtracks. In the PS2 era games, each game has a very distinct soundtrack and sound. Dynasty Warriors 3 uses a lot of MIDI in its soundtrack. Its sound is kind of reminiscent of an old JRPG if an old JRPG joined a metal band. Dynasty Warriors 4 uses the most traditional Chinese instruments out of any of the Dynasty Warriors games and has a very rough around the edges kind of grunge sound, which is in stark contrast to Dynasty Warriors 5, which has a very clean, highly produced sound, and it uses a lot of programmed drums and electronic elements. But apart from just sounding different, the important thing is that, say, Dynasty Warriors 4, its soundtrack is made up of almost entirely original songs. It carries over very little from Dynasty Warriors 3 or 2. Same goes for Dynasty Warriors 5. Most of its songs are new, and it ditches most of the songs from Dynasty Warriors 4. Dynasty Warriors 7 and 8, on the other hand, in my opinion, don't really have their own distinct sounds. To be honest, whenever I hear a song from one of these games, I can't remember which game or which level it's from specifically, I just know it's from 7 or 8. Rather than reinventing the sound a bit when it came time to make Dynasty Warriors 8, it pretty much feels like they made a part 2 to Dynasty Warriors 7's soundtrack. Dynasty Warriors 8 even reuses several songs from 7, and even reuses or remixes the occasional song from Dynasty Warriors 4 or 5. But, so what, right? Why does it matter if Dynasty Warriors 7 sounded really good? If it's not broken, don't fix it, right? Well, I like the music from Dynasty Warriors 7 and 8. It's pretty cool. It's got some great songs, some bangers, but it isn't nearly as great or memorable as the PS2 era Warriors games, in my opinion. Now, taste in music is very, very subjective, and this topic, out of any of the topics I've talked about so far, is probably the one I'm least qualified to talk about. My music vocabulary is extremely limited. I have absolutely nothing even close to approaching an academic understanding of music, so take my layman's opinion with a grain of salt. So apart from Dynasty Warriors 7 and 8 not having distinct sounds from one another, a more important thing that is lacking from 7 and 8's soundtracks for me is that they don't really set a mood. They don't reinforce any kind of theme or emotion. It's kind of just general go kick some ass type music. Now, in fairness, old Dynasty Warriors games were also a mixed bag when it came to this. Both the new and old Dynasty Warriors games have a big list of tracks that aren't made for any specific stage or battle, but instead are used here and there across multiple stages, and for different situations. And these kinds of songs can be great, don't get me wrong, I absolutely love some of these tracks, both from the old games and the new games. But a game like Dynasty Warriors 5 impresses me for a specific reason, because it has, more than any of the other Dynasty Warriors games, lots of songs that are only used for one battle. And because they're only used for one battle, they're able to be tailor-made to amplify or do most of the heavy lifting when it comes to setting the mood or the tone of the battle or stage. Let's look at a few examples. The Awful Night. This song is used in the Battle of Guandu, Cao Cao versus Yuan Shao. The battle was set at night, and the dramatic and dark sound of this track really suits that nicely. It's also a lot slower than the average track from Dynasty Warriors 5. I think that nicely complements how this battle plays out. It's a slow grind where you have to hold out against overwhelming amounts of enemies until you finally get an opportunity to strike back. And the song has a certain kind of macabre or somberness to it, which to me paints a nice mental image of Yuan Shao and Cao Cao, former childhood friends fighting to destroy each other and everything they've built. Or Fate Corrodes Me, the song used in the Battle of Yiling. This track is really heavy and badass, but it's also incredibly sad sounding. To me, it's the sound of a vengeful man's breaking heart. But instead of mourning, that same man wishes to use his heartbreak as a weapon to destroy his enemies. Even if there's absolutely nothing left to celebrate about after the battle is won. To me, this song is the theme song of Liu Bei giving up on everything he held dear up until this point, all to avenge somebody who would probably disapprove of these actions. Maybe you think I'm reading too much into these songs and that I'm giving it more thought than even the creators did, but I don't really think that's true. I think the composer was intentionally trying to set a mood here, but that's literally my only comeback, is just like, nuh-uh. I've been searching through Dynasty Warriors 7 and 8 soundtracks, and while I find many of the songs really cool and kick-ass, I really can't think of any song in the newer Dynasty Warriors games that conveys any kind of emotion like that. Well, any song that conveys an emotion other than adrenaline rush, go kick some ass kind of thing, which is a valid emotion, and I'm not taking away from that at all, don't get me wrong. I find it weird that there aren't songs like Fate Corrodes Me or The Awful Night in the soundtracks of Dynasty Warriors 7 or 8. Because these games arguably handle storytelling a lot better than the old Dynasty Warriors games did. Maybe because there's a lot more focus on conveying emotion through the writing and narrative in Dynasty Warriors 7 and 8. They didn't feel the need to convey it as much through music, especially the music that plays during a battle. But maybe I'm totally wrong on all that. If you do think I'm horribly off base about the soundtracks for Dynasty Warriors 7 and 8, please let me know in the comments. Tell me what it is you really like about Dynasty Warriors 7 and 8 soundtracks. Tell me what's your favorite song from the series as a whole. And if you have a favorite song, tell me if you remember what battle it plays for and what kind of emotion it conveys. I don't have a whole lot to say about the soundtracks for Samurai Warriors and Warriors Orochi. I just want to quickly talk about how much they reuse old tracks from previous games so blatantly. Way more than even the newest Dynasty Warriors games. To me, Samurai and Warriors Orochi do this so often that it screams of laziness to me. I mean, seriously, the song for the Battle of Nagashino has basically been the same since Samurai Warriors 1, just a slight remix of it every time. Same goes for Samurai Scanners from Warriors Orochi. The songs are getting old, and basically the soundtracks to Samurai and Warriors Orochi really need an overhaul. Maybe Samurai Warriors 5 can do that, and introduce some new melodies for Christ's sake. Now, moving away from music, so I did talk about character designs in my main video, but I didn't talk specifically about the cast of female characters and their designs. And I hesitate to talk about this a little bit because I don't want to accidentally stumble into the path of, say, Puritanism or sex negativity or anything, but I do have an issue with how the female characters are designed in the newer games. More specifically, how many of them have been increasingly sexualized more and more as the series has progressed. I'm going to stick exclusively to Dynasty Warriors here, as the female cast of Samurai Warriors has always been pretty sexualized since the very beginning, so there's not really much of a change there. And I want to be really clear that there's always a time and place for shameless, schlocky media that features very sexualized male or female characters, as long as we're talking about adult characters and media that's marketed and sold to an appropriate age range. In of itself, it really isn't a problem. That being said, sometimes the sexualization of female characters is so overstated that it kinda compromises the artistic merit of a piece of work or media. And this should be news to absolutely no one who's played video games at any point in the last 30 years or so. With all that being said, I appreciated the grounded and plausible for the time period look of the character designs in the old Dynasty Warriors games. And that also applies to its female cast of characters. The female characters, for the most part, all look badass and ready for battle in the old Dynasty Warriors games. They are actually dressed practically, and while there is certainly some intentional sex appeal, it's usually subtle enough to not feel like some cheap fan service or like it's out of place. I mean, if the female characters were wearing ancient Chinese themed stripper outfits, it would kind of look a bit weird when they're fighting on the battlefield, wouldn't it? It might also alienate some of the female players who want to engage in the same ass-kicking, taking names power fantasy, and not have to think about the fact that all the female characters are dressed more to catch the attention of people in a sexy, titillating way. It's kind of like when you have one female player show up to play a game of like Dungeons and Dragons or something with like 4 or 5 other dudes, and a few of them start acting a bit weird and treating them a bit different because they're a chick. It can make them feel like everyone at the table expects them to act differently and not engage on the same level because they're a woman. Like, they can't just show up and play a badass fighter that kicks ass and takes names. They have to deal with weird comments and unsavory stuff. And I think we can all agree that kind of environment is stuff we want to see less and less of in the gaming space. And I used to applaud and hold up the old Dynasty Warriors games of how to do female character designs right, because they're all dressed for battle and they don't look out of place. And they're not treated differently for being women. Well, kinda. It gets a bit weird because ancient Chinese history was actually really sexist, and you know. It was the year 200 AD, what are you gonna do? But what was cool about the old games was that if you were a gamer that identified as female, there was a nice variety of types of representation you could go for. Most of the female characters were dressed pretty practically and were really badass. A couple of them are a bit more cutesy and innocent, and then just a few of them are like sultry and sexy and femme fatale and all that. So no matter what kind of female character you were looking for, you had some kind of representation that could suit you. There are some overtly sexualized female characters from the old games, mainly Zhenji and Zhu Rong. But these are the exception rather than the rule, and their sexualization doesn't go as far as to be crude, in my opinion. It's kind of understated and equalist approach to female character designs is sadly a little bit unique to the old games and not that common throughout the industry, especially not the Japanese game industry. Whereas the later games' approach to the female characters' designs is a lot more in line with what you commonly see in the Japanese game industry. What do I mean by that exactly? Well, making female characters that are still feminine, pretty, maybe even have a little bit of sex appeal while still being dressed practically and looking ready for battle, is a lot of effort and not all that common, especially from Japanese games. You know what is a lot more common and probably a lot easier? To just make most of your female characters fan service vehicles with skimpy and practical and most certainly not battlefield appropriate outfits. And it's not only the way they dress. Most of the female characters' Muso attacks have the camera zoom in real close on their ass or tits, and or have them pose in some provocative way to show off to the player. Like I said, I don't mind sexuality or sexy female characters, far from it. But in the recent Dynasty Warriors games, to be honest, the female characters look out of place. Not just on the battlefield, but like in this world, generally speaking. Their designs look like they were made for attractive women to wear to cosplay conventions and the like in our world. They don't look at all like what women, especially women on the battlefield, would wear in ancient China, hell, even a fantasy variant of ancient China. To me, it comes across as crass sexualization designed to sell DLC outfits that are even more skimpy than the base game ones. I don't want to throw this word around lightly, but to me, honestly, it comes off as objectification. I mean, come on, these are significant historical figures, and they've gone out of their way to make these significant historical figures playable characters that participate in battles. Even though the vast majority of female historical figures from this time period wouldn't have been on the battlefield. And that's cool. That's the kind of fantasification that I like to see from a game set in this kind of time period. I don't think Dynasty Warriors would be enhanced at all by sexism, so why not follow through on that and make their designs and outfits and poses follow suit and make them look the part. Okay, that's gonna do it for now. Quick video, I know. I could probably ramble in a barely coherent way about these games for days and days, but for now I've got some other stuff to work on, and I'll come back to Dynasty and Samurai Warriors when Samurai Warriors 5 comes out. In the meantime, I'm working on a video for Persona 5 Strikers, which I'm playing through right now, and a couple other projects in the works. But enough about me for now. What do you guys think? What game has the best soundtrack? Which girl is best girl? Who is your waifu? And what are some of the top songs from the series? Let me know in the comments below. And as always, if you like the video, please click the thumbs up. If you want to see more, subscribe. And I'll see you next time. Peace out.